So FEEDXtra, typically we're going to see a 6-to-1 return on our investment for palm kernel, and when we apply it to grass silage, our return on investment is typically 4-to-1. So we're going to demonstrate that with the figures that we're quoting here and actually measuring today. So how are we doing that? Increase in ME and a reduction in NDF. So I'm going to quantify some of these results as we go through our presentation and demonstrate it with some New Zealand trial data as well. Our FEEDXtra, this is an electron micrograph of a leaf. So after 1 hour sitting in water, buffer, we see the cell surface is roughed up a little bit. But when we add FEEDXtra, you can see the surface is much, much rougher. This means that the surface area of the plant has increased significantly, allowing the rumen microbes a much larger area to attach to. That means those microbes can do their job quicker and much more efficiently. So that's the whole objective of what we're trying to do with this FEEDXtra, is get more energy, milk, out of the feed that we've already paid for and feeding to these animals. So New Zealand data, what we're seeing, and I've quantified with a device down here, is we get a 0.9 megajoule increase in grass silage. Very consistent, and it happens typically within 15 minutes. That's around 60% of our response. Maximum response is at 3 hours. So what we're demonstrating here is, I don't know, how long did Brian and Joe talk? Maybe 20 minutes, half an hour? So we're going to see this sort of ballpark figure for grass silage. Perfectly the same result for maize, silage, and for palm kernel as well. And we're scanning all three of those components here today with a live demonstration. Dairy NZ figures, if we take 80 megajoules of ME to generate 1 kilo of milk solids, Dairy NZ's figures, not ours. If we're increasing our ME by 0.9, that's 11 grams of milk solids. So if we're feeding 5 kilos of silage, we can expect 55 grams of milk solids per cow as a result of purely adding this FEEDXtra. Second component we're expecting is a reduction in NDF. So with our grass silage that we've done to date, we're seeing a reduction in NDF of 6 percentage points. What does this mean? If we consider wheat bix, don't know about you, but I can only eat 1 or 2 dry wheat bix and that's enough for me, I'm gagging. Add milk, I can go for half a dozen or so. Same sort of scenario applies in the cow. If we can reduce the NDF content of our feed, the cow will physically eat more. She's constrained by that volume in her rumen. She can't get physically more grass into her. That's our major problem in New Zealand. We're not feeding our cows sufficiently. There's a published meta-analysis up here in 1999 which shows every reduction in NDF, 1 percentage point, increases our dry matter intake by 170 grams. That's on a TMR, so if we take 50% of that, we're in the right sort of ballpark for our grass-fed cows here in New Zealand. So if we're assuming our 5 kilo of silage intake and our 6 percentage point reduction in NDF, that means the cows can eat, ballpark figure, if we've got 25% of our ration as grass silage, means the cows can eat an extra 1/4 kilo of dry matter, extra 1/4 kilo of grass, which is always available, hopefully. And this translates to 35 grams of milk solids. So in summary, increasing ME, we're getting 55 grams of milk solids from our 5 kilos of grass silage that we're treating with FEEDXtra, and 35 grams from a reduction in NDF. Total, 90 odd grams. Sounds all very good, but really, let's prove it in New Zealand data. So what I show here is some Mexican data that our company has generated. And what I'm trying to point out here is the consistency in response. All of the responses are greater than 2 litres per head per day. I know we don't deal in litres, but it translates directly through into milk solids response. The key that I wanted to show with this slide is really consistent responses. So our New Zealand data. I want to thank Mark and Penny Brown for letting us play with their cows. Agrifeeds and AB Vista, the firm that I represent, have co-funded this trial, these 2 trials that we're about to present. So thank you, Mark, for letting us play with the cows. What we did, the FEEDXtra is a liquid. So how are we going to apply a liquid to dry palm kernel? Phil Harrison and I struggled with this for quite some time. We came up with a scenario that let's put 500 litres of water into a palm kernel trough, add our FEEDXtra on top of that, which will disperse through that trough, then we can add our palm kernel on top of it. So what we have here, the first 2 troughs behind Phil's ute, 500 litres of water plus the palm kernel for the control group, and the back trough has exactly the same plus the FEEDXtra in it. That's the only difference. So how do we apply that in a trial situation? Luckily, Mark's farm has auto-drafting, so at the end of the morning milking, we auto-drafted off the treatment herd, kept them in the yard. The control herd went back to the paddock. They were fenced off into 2/3 of the paddock, so the only difference between the control and treatment is the FEEDXtra. The treatment herd went out after the control herd, locked in the same paddock, identical diet, only difference is the FEEDXtra. What sort of response did we get? We have two different dose rates here. We started with a high dose rate just to make sure that we got a response, and we have the commercial dose rate that we're recommending here in New Zealand. It's 750 mils of FEEDXtra per metric tonne of dry matter, or 3/4 of a mil per kilo of dry matter. Our responses, you can see up here we've got 106 grams from our large dose, and actually a slightly higher response of 118 grams of milk solids for our commercial dose of FEEDXtra. So ballpark figure, we were getting 100 grams of milk solids for adding this FEEDXtra. This is with our palm kernel. We've already paid for the palm kernel. We're getting a bigger response from that palm kernel. It's all very good. A bit hard mucking around with 500 litres of water, etc., in your PKE trough. So we wanted to apply it at Agrifeeds blend plant down in Tauranga in Tauriko. So what we did in this instance was apply that FEEDXtra as the blends were being manufactured at Tauriko. So the blend simply arrived at Mark's place at a silo. So we had a treatment silo and a control silo. Only difference between the two was the addition of FEEDXtra. Cows were obviously fed in bale to do this. So our responses here, we have two different stages of lactation, late lactation at 300 days and early lactation at 75 days. And you can see our response here, 124 grams of milk solids as a result of adding the FEEDXtra, and again 117 grams. So ballpark figure plus 100 grams of milk solids as a result of adding our FEEDXtra. 6-to-1 return on palm kernel. That's a bloody good return in my book. Remember, we've already paid for our palm kernel. So in conclusion, we're typically getting 100 grams of milk solids in response to adding our FEEDXtra and a return of 6-to-1. Best applied through Agrifeeds plant because we can add liquids there very easily. I just wanted to draw your attention to the board over here where we've got some hopefully interesting results. So we started at 0.99 ME and we went up to 10.94, simply as a direct result of adding the FEEDXtra, which we were doing here. So nearly a whole megajoule increase, which is exactly what we were talking about before. And our NDF went down by 5.5 points, exactly as we were presenting in the presentation. Our maize silage, I'm not sure if you can see that from there. ME went up by 0.24, so remembering at the moment we're at 15-20 minutes, half an hour at most. We expect our maximum response at 3 hours. So this will go up to about 0.5. And our NDF reduction already is at 4 percentage points. Caroline is just doing the palm kernel, so we'll put those figures up during question time and we can address that a bit later on.
We were talking about, on the table here, about your product and actually being able to get it onto the likes of silage or maize silage, and obviously the various applications on different farms of how to do that. So we would generally put your silage out and then put your cows out onto the break and feed it out that way. How long does it take for your product to actually start working really well? For example, can we inoculate a stack or a baleage or anything like that, or can we apply it sort of 3-6 hours, or how do we even get it onto a feed out wagon full of silage?
Good question. Almost everybody that I talked to about FEEDXtra asks if we can put it in during the unsiling process. The answer is no, and AB Vista found that out the hard way. What happens if you apply it during the unsiling process is the silage is actually broken down completely, and it comes down to water and your silage stack will flow out. We had this happen 3 times where we blocked roads with silage stacks, not good. So good option, but no, you can't apply FEEDXtra during the unsiling process. It must be during the feeding out process. So in terms of a mixer wagon, we have, I'm just going to grab this device to show you because it's really demonstrative. For a feed out wagon, we have this little device here, which is called a Venturi device. So if you're adding any liquid to your mixer wagon, the liquid would simply flow through here, and we could redirect the water through this part, and this generates a suction here. The suction would bring in the FEEDXtra, so no electrical parts. This is a couple of $100, it's a nothing. So that's a nice, easy way of introducing it. The other way is obviously to put a sprayer on your feed-out wagon or your mixer wagon. We're working on developing a hydraulically powered sprayer. So as you turn on your elevators, your beaters and your conveyor to feed out of your feed-out wagon, the FEEDXtra will be applied automatically. So very easy to do, but no, unfortunately, Pam, you can't do it during the ensiling process.
Ken, if we put this extra in through the blending facility, we get a better mix and a better response. But obviously that only has a bearing on the palm kernel and the diet. So if we're mixing it with maize in a mixer wagon or other feeds, it'll have no influence to that feed's ME, the secondary feed.
The FEEDXtra is only going to work on what it physically touches. It won't magically transfer from one feed to the next in the rumen. So if you want it to work on your blends, get it applied at the plant. If you want it to work on your maize silage, apply it on farm as well. So you'd need to do both if you wanted to have both of them working additively together. Is that your question?
Yeah, it is. And I suppose my thinking is if we're only going to get 4-to-1 putting it on farm, and we can get 6 or 7-to-1 doing it properly, and
No.
one might dilute each other.
The 4-to-1 is on grass silage and the 6-to-1 is on the blend. So you can see we're getting a higher response from our palm kernel that we tested here today than we did for the grass silage or the maize silage. So that's where the difference in return on investment comes. So the best return on investment is treating your blends at the blend plant. Also, it's much easier. All you do is just tell your local ANZR, add that FEEDXtra stuff that crazy ball guy was talking about.
The trial that you showed in the figure of 6-to-1 would indicate that that's probably the most profitable thing we can do on farm. Has the work been peer reviewed?
We haven't published it yet because we're just going through the commercial phase. So we want to keep the data in-house. So that's the specific trial here in New Zealand, but we have conducted, more than 20 trials globally. I don't know if you know a gentleman called Ian Lane, who's the peer of Brian's, and Joe and I as well. He has conducted a global trial for us. I think there was 8 farms globally involved with that. So Ian's in the process of publishing that. I'd like to think Ian's name speaks for itself in terms of peer review. So yes, there are peer reviewed journals out there that have our articles and our product in it, yes.